Hi, today I'm going to be talking about the stages of respiration and a key biological molecule that's used in order to store energy in respiration, the ATP. First, let's try to define what respiration essentially is. Now, respiration is defined as the controlled release of energy from the breakdown of organic molecules, and here organic molecules can be defined as whatever from lipids to even carbohydrates inside the cells. Now, in respiration, we have two different types of respiration, and respiration classifies to one, aerobic respiration, and two, to anaerobic respiration. You probably would have heard these terms before, but the difference between them is that in aerobic respiration, we use oxygen in the process of respiration, and anaerobic, we do it in the absence of oxygen. And the stages for each of these processes kind of differ slightly, in that in anaerobic respiration, we go from this stage, glycolysis, directly to pyruvate breakdown. So it's a much more simplified process. But then in aerobic respiration, we start off with glycolysis, and then we go into the process which is called link reaction, and then into a process called the Krebs cycle. And we end with oxidative phosphorylation. And throughout all of these stages, we're mainly going to be looking at aerobic respiration today. Throughout all of these stages, what happens is we essentially create reduced hydrogen carriers, which then create ATP molecules. The exact mechanism of how we'll explain later on, but today we're going to focus on this end product of ATP molecules, which are essentially energy storage molecules. So let's look at what ATP molecules are. Now, ATP molecules are kind of like a shortened abbreviation version of adenosine triphosphate molecules. And the main goal of these ATP molecules is essentially to store energy. How does it store energy? Well, in an ATP molecule, energy is essentially stored between the bonds between the phosphates. So it's stored in the bonds between the phosphates. And we essentially kind of retrieve energy from an ATP molecule when an ATP molecule is hydrolyzed into an ADP and an inorganic phosphate molecule. So we kind of retrieve and get that sort of energy when we go through the process of hydrolysis, which then results in the ATP turning into an ADP plus an inorganic phosphate, which we will denote in this notation right here. So how this is going to look like is very simple. I'm going to kind of try to draw out this process for you to better understand. We have an adenosine molecule and 3 phosphate molecules, phosphate groups attached. And we will call this an ATP molecule, right? And where energy lies in an ATP molecule is in these bonds between the phosphate groups. So energy is going to be present right here. And I'll quickly remind you of the chemical name of a phosphate group, which is this. And as we undergo the process of hydrolysis, what's going to happen is we're going to have addition of water, which is essentially going to break the molecule down. So we're still going to have 2 phosphate groups attached. However, we're going to have, instead of having another phosphate group attached, we're going to have an inorganic phosphate group. And so this guy is just kind of on its own, not bonded. And we call this an ADP molecule. And in this process, we kind of retrieve this energy that was present in the bonds between the phosphate groups.